Okay, while I'm setting up, we'll listen to one piece so you'll have an idea of what this music sounds like. Okay, this is a professional recording of the Bezmana Ensemble that I produced 10 years ago for the NYUAD project, sponsored by European Union. We'll discuss this shortly. Okay. And this is, again, this is in the Usul, the rhythmic pattern called Zincir, which is a chain. Zincir means chain in Turkish. It's a chain of 5 rhythmic patterns. This is what it sounds like. That was one cycle. It had 120 beats. I will go on to explain. Sorry. Now. Maqam and Usul. Am I on here? No, this one is on. Yes. It's generally understood from a variety of Ottoman and modern Turkish sources that a modal system described as maqam and tarkib, and a system of rhythmic cycles termed either usul or iqa, form the basis for all urban and especially all courtly music in Turkey. But we are in a vastly different situation in describing the modal system on the one hand and the functioning of the rhythmic system on the other. Whereas from the early 18th century with the writings of Prince Demetrius Cantemir, who is the foundation of Ottoman music theory, theorists showed great interest in defining maqam. But in describing usul, the norm in the Ottoman period was simply to state the number of beats and their internal divisions. Even more recent Turkish theorists have very little to say about the relationship of usul and melody. The difference between maqam and usul in modern Turkey can be seen in the respective positions of the taksim, the purest expression of maqam. Taksim is the instrumental improvisation. The difference in status of the taksim and the status of composition in the long usuls, which represent the most developed manifestation of the usul principle. The adoption of staff notation through the 19th century and definitively by the early 20th century in Turkey did not eliminate the oral creation of taksim improvisations. But the expression of usul has no such pure manifestation. Unlike, for example, South Indian musical culture, Turkish classical music has no tradition of solo percussion performances. The usul only exists as a vehicle for composition. At the beginning of the 18th century, Prince Cantemir wrote, "Because the usuls are so intricate, those who do not know the meter cannot play the songs at all, even though they were to hear the song 1,000 times. After Kantemir's death in 1723, the Ottoman Usul system became considerably more intricate. The Usul, named Zencir, the chain, is the longest rhythmic cycle in Ottoman music, consisting of a chain of 5 usuls: Çifte Düyek in 16, Fachte in 20, Çember in 24, Devri Kabir in 28, and Berefshan in 32, totaling 120 beats. Far from being a rare rhythmic cycle, almost every concert suite in the Ottoman music begins with the vocal composition, the beste, in the Usul Zencir. And it is also used in the instrumental peshev. By analyzing the relationship between rhythm and melody in 2 beste compositions, which I'll try to do now, from the mid to the late 18th century, we can better understand the enjambment between melody and usul patterns that were considered the height of art. The repertoire offers much to study expectation and memory in this entirely oral compositional art, which was only notated at the very end of the Ottoman era. The heart, as it were, of the Ottoman courtly repertoire were the vocal compositions using the long usuls. This is the beste form, the nakush beste, and the kar. The repertoire has very little presence in the gazino nightclubs, even in the later 19th century, and certainly not in the 20th century. Already by the turn of the 20th century, the vast majority of new vocal pieces were in the much simpler şarkı form, which utilized the short usuls in 5, 9, or 10, for which there was a public. After World War I, rather few new vocal compositions utilizing the long usuls were created. Thus, among the vast majority of the dwindling audience for sophisticated urban music in Turkey, this repertoire was increasingly obscure. It survived thanks to the efforts of a limited number of elite musicians who, from Ottoman families or people attached to the aristocracy or the old bureaucracy. Some of these men were also composers, and following a generation of official neglect and even discouragement during the Turkish Republic, the revived classical performance, particularly of Mesut Cemil on the radio, emphasized choruses and eliminated percussion entirely. Thus, the combination of declining visibility of the Ottoman courtly repertoire, the increasing reliance on notation in pedagogy, and the widespread lack of familiarity with the relationship between percussion, usul, and melodic structure has rendered an understanding of the role of usul a fragile and obscure musical technique. Since the late 1980s, this has led to a reaction among tradition-conscious musicians to reinstate percussion. But by this late date, often is without much command of the usul melodic relations as they had been understood by Ottoman composers. My own teachers, Vahit Anadolu, who was born in 1951 and is blind, and his teacher, with whom I also studied, Khurshid Ungay, represent a direct line of Ottoman percussionists. When we examine the nature of the relationship of melody and usul, many of these musical gestures reveal a conflict between musical phrase and formal rhythmic structure. This was the product of a long internal development within Ottoman music, reaching back to the last third of the 17th century. Vocal compositions were learned at what's called meşk, which were oral music sessions, teaching sessions. They were used in their simpler form, and they were beaten on the knees. So maybe I can demonstrate. The divisions of, this was the syllables, düm, tek, ta, hek, teka, helped to fix specific sections and syllables of the vocal piece with the usul, even where a melody deviated quite far from the normative usul patterns. Thus, it was normal to sit, and your teacher would teach you bass, düm, on your right thigh, tek on your left, the treble, teke on the left, 2 trebles, ta hek, which was usually the signal for the end of a musical phrase within an usul. It often ended with ta, hek, te, ke, te, ke. And before notation was in common use, musicians learned the piece by connecting the syllables of the text with the dum, tek, ta, etc. within the cycle of the usul. And they correspond in this drum, in daire, to dum, tek, te, ke, ta, hek. And in the Ottoman technique, we use one hand. The folkloric technique uses two hands, but this is discouraged. It's a one-hand technique. Okay. Musicians who had learned the compositions in this oral way were in a much better position to compose new items in the genres and to be able to communicate the structure of the older pieces. This knowledge survived at the interface of kinetic, musical, and analytic understanding. Unfortunately, there are at present virtually no possibility of doing field work within the musical communities in the major Turkish cities to ascertain the normative usage of the long usuls, because only musicians who have been born early in the interwar era had the possibility of learning in this manner. My teacher, Khurshid Bey, had learned in this manner. For the most part, the last musicians who had learned this vocal repertoire orally have passed away within the last 30 years. So let's just go over. You have a pile of music, I think, written music, which is a shortcut. In the old days, the Turkish musicians resented notation because they felt you only learned things properly if you repeated them a great many times orally. But since we don't have time for that, if you can locate something called sazkar, two things. You locate something called sazkar beste, and you have my crude handwriting with the usul written underneath. That you see the used thing that looks like an ellipse, some kind of oval. That's meant to be a whole note. You also have a separate sheet with the usul written out, taken from Yilmaz Öztun's encyclopedia. Do you have that? It's a single sheet from a Turkish book. Okay. So I'd like to go over this thing called sazkar. In the written notation, it's a compound maqam, where the note that's written sol, written as G, as sol, is the finalis. Right, you see this thing called sazkar beste. You should have two versions of it, one without the usul and one with the usul, a handwritten version with the usul. And the understanding the finalis and the dominance, of course, of the maqam helps us realize where the melody corresponds or doesn't correspond to the usul. Because in this style, there are traditions and techniques of where a melody must end with the end of an usul and where the melody can continue into the next usul. So it's taking beats away from the following section. And in a case of an usul with a compound like this, it's Zincir, which has 5 usuls, there are traditions of where you're expected to take your melody over into the next usul and where you should not do that. Okay, now let's listen to a performance without percussion for a moment of this piece. This is I recorded this exactly 30 years ago from my vocal teacher, Fatih Salgar, who is now the director of the state chorus. Then he was just a singer in the chorus. He's playing oud at the beginning. He plays a little taksim in sazkar. Oh, I should say about sazkar, if you look at the notation, you'll see that sometimes it's emphasizing the G, sometimes the B, because it's a compound. It uses rast and sega. Rast ends on it's written G, sega ends written B, 1 comma flat. So there's this shifting of tonal emphasis. recording. We'll pause here for a moment. What you have now are three sections of the Usul. So he's starting with the simplest one, with 16, which is, as you see, the Usul, dum, tek, dum, tek, yeah? Then the 20, dum, tek, dum, ta, hek, tek, yeah? Then the 24, dum, tek, yeah, dum, tek, dum, da, hek, tek, yeah. Now, let's see how this fits. Oh, I'll just tell you, I have 5 minutes, I see, that then we get to a section in 28, which is divided as 2 14s. So that's in the 1, 2, the fourth line of music, dum, tek, dume, tek, dum, tek, yeah. That brings us to the end of the first page. Let's listen to him again and try to follow where the Usul goes. You'll notice that, well, there's many things to notice, which I won't have much time to explain. There's an emphasis on 12-beat melodies in this. The 16 cycle, in fact, has a melody in 12, followed by a closing of tek, yeah. It blends into the 20, which also has a 12-beat melody, and then the 24-beat chenber is composed of 2 units of 12 melodically. So let's just listen to Fatih and try to follow the Usul. That's one cycle. That's one cycle. So I guess we'll have to end it here. Any questions at this stage? Yeah?
If you listen to the melody just without the percussion commitment, are you able, or is someone able just to see what is it, a ta or a hek or something like this?
Well,
because I'm not
again, in this style, the usul beats don't say the drum beats don't determine the melody, but the length of the phrase does. For example, when I said that in Çember, which is what the 1, 2, 3rd line of music, it's 24 beats but divided into 12 beats, 2 units of 12. So saz, saz, kar. If you look at that, doom, doom, tek, doom, doom, tek, tek. It's a unit of 12 beats.
Yeah, but for you it's obvious that it's doom, doom, tech, and not tech, boom, damn.
As I said, the dooms and techs, the treble and the bass of the percussion do not determine the melody.
But they follow the melody?
Yes.
Yes.
They cannot change. They're not altered. But what we understand that the composer thinks in terms of the length of the melodic phrase in relation to the usul. So there are times when if you analyze the usul, you can see the composer is playing games with us. I don't have the time to explain at times where he will, as I mentioned, take the melody from one usul and drag it over to the other. Now, as a percussionist, I was always told, don't pay attention to that, continue to do the usul. Because it's not the job of the percussionist to establish a dialogue with the melody. That's what the composer was doing. Yeah. And again, unfortunately, it's not a situation where we can do much field work because the generation that knew this orally is not with us anymore. Yes, Tyler?
So, Zev, just to clarify, so these dooms, the texts, they are particular strokes with the hand because they can be different lengths because some of these are 4 and some are 2 for doom.
That's right.
So it's particular strokes.
Yeah. Yeah, and before the notation was, remember, these pieces were composed in the 18th century when notation was not widely used. Notation was used. That's how we know this music. Notation was used, but not widely used. And it wasn't used in pedagogy. So that the usul was essential for teaching the melodies. When you learned something like saz, saz, kar, your teacher would tell you where is tek, where is doom, what syllable of the text belongs to which beat. You see why this was very important pedagogically when notation was not being used.
And how many types of strokes are there?
Not many. There's doom for the bass, tek for treble, teka, two trebles, ta, which is the stronger treble, and hek, which is both hands together. When I'm playing kettle drums, you play both of them on the treble of the kettle drums, 2 sticks. There's also dume, where you have two basses in the middle of the drum, rather than doom, it's dume, two basses. But it's not a big repertoire of strokes. The only thing they will do is that they have what's called velvele, which is from Arabic walwala, which means more intermediary strokes. So when you heard, that was Wahid Bey playing with the chorus at the beginning, he's putting in all the intermediary strokes. Instead of doom, he might be doing doom at times. But pedagogically, that's not used. When a teacher would teach you the melody, you were only expected to do doom, just a whole note, without any velvela, without intermediary strokes. That would be put in by the percussionist during performance. But it's not part of the learning of the melody or the composition. The composer was not thinking about the velvela strokes. He was thinking about the basic usul beats. That's an important distinction, because if you start putting in the intermediary strokes, it makes it much more complicated, and it's basically irrelevant to the construction of the melody. Any other question? Okay. Good, we move on.